Y la tercera línea de la disputa del discurso es el derecho social, que ahora el modelo neoliberal establece como un ámbito de oportunidades de negocio. O sea, los derechos sociales, los derechos humanos, ahora es un espacio de lucro, de negocio de las grandes transnacionales, en donde la salud y la seguridad social son un nuevo nicho de acumulación de capital en todo el mundo.
The third area of argument has to do with social rights, and in the neoliberal view, human rights can actually be implemented for profit. Multinationals take on the making money from health and social security.
Transitar de un discurso defensivo, un discurso
Building and Woodworkers International, which represents construction workers and woodworkers all over the world. So the unions of those workers affiliate to a global union. There's also Union Network International, International for service workers. There's Public Services International, which helped to organize this global intern strike. Historically, the global unions did a lot of the coordination of international solidarity work. In the 1970s, they created these global company councils, saying, oh, all those guys work for Ford, get those unions talking to each other, right? Facilitating those kinds of meetings. More recently, like Industrial down here, they've done much more campaigning kind of work. Some really interesting campaigns, some really interesting, innovative campaigns have come out of that. In addition to this kind of increased focus and development of campaigning, global unions have signed something called global framework agreements. The idea being there's companies that have operations all over the world. So how do we actually enforce those rights? It's been pushed out of the WTO. There's no other organization, there's no other organ internationally that polices labor rights. So how are we actually going to do that? This is one of the results of it being pushed out of those international organizations. The global unions don't sit on their hands. They say, oh, well, let's try to implement it. Let's talk to our affiliates in these different countries, organize, get these companies to sign a document that commits them to respecting workers' rights. So these are the list of global unions and how many global framework agreements each of them have signed. So Industrial, out in front a little bit with 51, historically one of the strongest, right? Because of the sector where they work in, with the highest returns on investment and capital investment and that kind of stuff. Strongest unions, strongest trade unions. Interestingly, the International Federation of Journalists, they have a framework agreement that they signed with Al Jazeera. But the Union Network International is right behind Industrial with a number of agreements signed. So each agreement is with a different company. What's in a global framework agreement? The most important part are the core labor standards, recognized by the International Labor Organization. They've been passed through national parliaments, all these conventions passed through national parliaments, and then, okay, governments are committed to respecting these core labor standards. That's the most important thing. Freedom of association. Workers have the right to organize, right? Those two, 87 and 98, are what are internationally understood to be enabling rights. And so once workers have those respected, it's them who are going to decide what kind of organization they have, how they're going to organize, and how they're going to bargain. They're enabled, empowered to do that if those conventions are respected in their countries. Elimination of all forms of forced compulsory labor, no child labor, and elimination of any kind of discrimination. So that's the most important and the most consistently incorporated part in all of these global framework agreements. But they're from global trade unions and national affiliates that are in different sectors and have different, varying degrees of strength and different historical relationships with the employers. So of course there's a lot of variety in terms of the agreement. The vast majority, that's the most important part. This is the first framework agreement, a quote from a piece of the text from the first agreement that was signed between the International Union of Food Workers and Danone. So what's the point of this agreement? It's to provide space within the specific global company's operations for unions to organize freely, workers to exercise their rights within the company, free from any form of obstruction, particularly the right to form or join a union. The company's saying that globally, this is what they're going to respect. This is what the global union was able to get out of the company, was get the company to commit to, right? So the idea since the beginning was this is about organizing. It's about having those enabling rights respected. All of these things are also included in the agreements. Not in every single agreement. More than half the agreements have something about occupational health and safety in the agreement, saying that we respect occupational health and safety rights and the right to create committees and like joint committees and all that kind of stuff at the workplace level. In many cases, the ILO, International Labour Organization, already has conventions or recommendations about these topics. Many times those are listed specifically in the framework agreements. Specific language about working hours, fair wages, whatever that means, right? Recognize local wage patterns, education and training, restructuring, suppliers and subcontractors. Example of weak supplier and subcontractor language, this is an interesting part, right? Whoa, we're talking about something. You're not the employer anymore, you're talking about somebody else. We're talking about global value chains now. We're talking about production networks now when we get into suppliers and subcontractors. So, an example of weak language in terms of suppliers is that the company will support and encourage suppliers to respect the same labor rights. But there are examples of very strong language where the signatory to the Global Framework Agreement says, if there are consistent, clear violations of these labor rights, we will terminate contracts. And that's happened. We've been able to use, in some cases, the Global Framework Agreement to end contractor relationships that we weren't a part of. We didn't represent those workers, but we were able to change who they work with as a result of this. Communication, regular meetings, how are you going to actually